Life was lonely for me because I worked and went to school and I didn't have any friends. I didn't have any family. It was really hard for me to kind of connect with people.
Your work is very dependent on funding, state funding, federal funding, grants, donations. That is a stressful year-to-year budget.
Our largest portion of what we do and the vast number of people that we serve, unfortunately, is in victim services. And those include domestic violence, sexual assault, and human trafficking.
Well, what do you love to do when you're not working?
We're serving almost 10,000 individuals a year. That it's like, hard choices now, easy life later. Or easy choices now, hard life later.
Welcome to Leadership Backstage, the podcast that exposes the raw truths behind leadership. We dive deep into blind spots, failures, and bold moves, questioning the myths leaders cling to and challenging you to think differently. Each episode brings unfiltered stories from CEOs, executives, and thought leaders who fought through scaling pains, culture clashes, and high-stakes decisions. This is where courage, clarity, and breakthrough thinking collide, sparking insights that actually matter. Here's your host, Claudia Williams.
Hi, and welcome to another episode of Leadership Backstage, where we go behind the curtain to uncover blind spots and breakthroughs. Today, we are joined by a woman who is entirely self-built. She went from having no friends to a world of relationships. She had to figure everything out for herself and by herself. And just when she became the CEO of YWCA Harrisburg, a massive operation, she went on a really painful personal journey, once again overcoming and finding the gifts life has to offer. Please welcome Mary Quinn. Hi, Mary.
Hi, Claudia. Thank you. That was like a very, very gracious introduction that, I pride myself on some humility, and that introduction was a lot.
Well, I've known you for a while now, and I'm blown away by your story and what you've overcome in your life, on your journey, and your success. To cap it off with humility and how humble you are. So how did you go from a fairly poor working class family in Detroit to the CEO of a massive operation in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania?
Yeah, I think it was a long trajectory. I've listened to, other people in leadership roles say, what you see before you is just, a semi-finished product, and you're not seeing the years that it took to get there and the failures along the way. And for me, I grew up just outside of Detroit in a poor working class family. My dad worked in a factory and my mom was a waitress. She never even graduated high school. I'm the youngest, and as my mother liked to say, a surprise. So I am the youngest by a lot. And, while I had all of my basic needs met, and I think my parents did the best they could with what they had, they were not able to really prepare me for how to think about my future and how to apply to colleges. And somehow I muddled through and started at a community college and then moved out here. I did have, my brother lived out here for a short amount of time, and I came out here and I enrolled in Penn State, was accepted, and he and his wife and family moved away. And I had kind of started setting down roots at that point, going to school. I went to school at night and I worked during the day full time. And so I did all of my classes at night. And what made that hard is that all the people that were doing night school with me were older than me at the time. I was in my 20s. And
they're adults, right? Working on.
Yeah, they were adults. They had families. They were not looking to, develop friendships or anything like that. They were busy. And then the people I worked with during the day were also older than me, adults, and had families and priorities and things like that. So It was a pretty lonely existence.
And it's not like you were going out to bars and hanging out and partying, and you had a packed schedule just to get done what you needed to get done.
And, I was disciplined. I didn't know, my end goal was not to be the CEO of the YWCA. My end goal was to have an education because I knew that was the thing that held my parents back. I knew if I just had, credentials and an education that I would find my way. And I didn't exactly know what that was. And there were things that I put in place for myself along the way to make sure that I was successful. I knew that I was not responsible. When I see how many people today do online schooling, and that wasn't an option for me. It was just becoming an option when I graduated with my graduate degree. Yeah. But I knew I had to work and go to school at night and get all of my papers and studies done. So I would plan my Saturdays to go sit in the library and do my work so that I got it done and I wasn't distracted. Because left to my own devices, I would have, made a snack, did a load of laundry, taken a nap, so
you experienced when work went remote, the things a lot of people experience when work went remote in 2020.
Yeah. And so that discipline, I think, really makes a difference in so many areas in our lives. Like just having, it's not, you can't wait for that motivation to show up. It's really that action that you take and the discipline in little ways. It doesn't have to be big, grand gestures.
Do you remember how old you were or at what point that education piece clicked for you where you said, I just know education is going to make the difference for me?
I don't, but I think one of the advantages that I did have as the youngest child of 3 and my 2, when you're the youngest, nobody cares about your opinion or like what you want to watch on TV or anything like that. Like you don't get those choices. You're the youngest, so you're the lowest on the totem pole, right?
Yeah, I can relate.
But the advantage also is you get to watch and see how, like, I remember watching both of my older siblings and their behaviors and how people reacted to their behaviors and how that observation and developing that self-awareness at an early age. Like, oh, I see, that my brother just reacted this way in a very defensive manner. And I can see how that's playing out somebody else. Like, you could watch it in real time. And, to me, I was like, I want to behave different. I want to react differently. And I don't know if it's just a character trait I have. I would also watch that in the places I worked before the YW. Before I was at the YW, I was also, working for a state association, and we did a lot of government relations things. And I got to kind of just watch and observe how the leadership of that organization handled certain situations. And I would think to myself, well, I like how they did that, or I don't like how they did that. And I would do it different, and I would put myself in those scenarios of how could I handle that differently?
Okay.
And even when my husband, Lenny, when his firm, Gannett Fleming, the CEO there, Bob Scare, how they handled him and his sickness. And I would say, gosh, that's the type of leader I want to be. I see how they're treating him, and I want to treat my staff this way. And I hope people see me in the same way and have the feelings about my leadership that I'm having towards the way that Gannett Fleming treated Lenny.
Okay, let's talk about Lenny. So you become the CEO of the YWCA Harrisburg, and I want to talk about the YW and the amazing work it does. But right around the same time, your husband, Lenny, is diagnosed with cancer. And you are a new CEO, and you have some fears associated with being a new CEO, and you're taking care of your husband and you're on this journey with your husband. Tell us about what that experience was like for you? What were you thinking and how were you doing this?
Yeah. So, back to our earlier conversation, life was lonely for me because I worked and went to school and I didn't have any friends. I didn't have any family. It was really hard for me to kind of connect with people. And then in 2005, I met my husband, Lenny. We both lived in the same apartment complex. And we started to date and eventually bought a house together and got married. And I, in 2013, left my government relations job to come to the YWCA. I took a chance. It was very much a lateral move at the time because I was not the CEO. I was the chief operating officer. And I said, I really admire their mission and that their connection to the community. And I want to give this a try. So it was the same pay for a lot more work, but I wanted that professional development experience because I was going to be supervising a lot more people. And I didn't really have that type of experience as a registered lobbyist of what I was doing. That leadership role, managing other people, I wanted to be able to do that. And so I took a chance. I came to the YWCA, and in less than 2 years, there was an opportunity. The previous CEO had left, and I applied for the position, got it. And so that was in 2015. And the year prior, Lenny had just been diagnosed with lymphoma. And we were originally assured that, it was kind of a slow growing cancer. And this was something that we would manage, and kind of like diabetes, like you manage it and watch it. Most people die with it, not from it. And so, we did for a couple years manage it well, but it did continue to grow and spread. And so in 2015, when I was named the new CEO, things were just busy. When I've talked to other new CEOs who, they want change, like they want to do things their way and they have ideas. Mm-hmm. And sometimes a lot of staff that are very resistant to that. And I certainly experienced a lot of that pushback, even though I was already there. It was difficult and I didn't really know how to navigate some of those situations and really assert myself as the new CEO, and still a little unsure. And then in 2017, Lenny continued to get more and more sick. And 2017, he passed away. And I was, talk about an opportunity to really learn and grow. I had kept Lenny's illness pretty close to the vest. I mean, I didn't really share it. The last thing I ever wanted was anyone to think that I couldn't do my job. So my board knew that my husband was ill. And they didn't know the extent of it. They didn't know he had been, put into palliative care and then hospice. And I think I may have told them maybe a week before he died that I was, hey, by the way, I'm going to need some time off.
It is shocking and understandable to me at the same time that you have this fear that so many women executive leaders have. I don't want anybody to think I can't handle this. So I'm going to keep all of this huge trauma and all this stuff bottled up as much as I can and just keep my head down and keep doing what I need to do. And in the meantime, you're doing a lot, to put it mildly. How did you compartmentalize all of that?
I don't know. And it's funny how grief works. You do think you're doing well, and then maybe something, reminds you or stresses you out again. And it can bring grief back pretty quickly, even though it's been, it's going to be 8 years since he passed. But I think, a couple of things that I had to come to terms with was I had been shouldering a burden of wanting the board to have a lot of confidence in me, but I didn't have enough confidence in myself to admit that, that I just couldn't bring myself to be vulnerable. I was also concerned at the time, I had a board who were wonderful women, but they weren't exactly that engaged. And I felt like if I tell them I need them to be more engaged and more active with me, then they can expect the same thing of me. They could start raising the bar with me. And I didn't know that I had a whole lot more to give at that point. And after Lenny passed, though, and you're spent at that point.
Yeah.
You're
I can't imagine.
I was 38 at the time. I was a week before my 39th birthday. And, a lot of the things I had envisioned for my life ended right then and there. There was no, that was kind of a hard
thing you envisioned that you felt ended at that point. What were the things you had envisioned that you felt ended?
I had always wanted a family, and it was already late in life to be, you think you have time, and it was, obviously that vision of my life was not going to happen. And, just even having the security of a second income. I mean, when Lenny passed, I lost 50% of my household income. Right. And I am left then with the more like everything. And, there's life insurance, but we didn't have the levels of life insurance that maybe you build as you get older and you have children and you want to make sure everything is taken care of. So, there's financial stress. We had just moved into a new house 9 months before he passed because his cancer turned very quickly and spread like wildfire when we didn't expect. Like, that wasn't the expectation of this slow growing cancer. And then all of a sudden it just kind of changed course and spread throughout his body too quickly. But one of the things, I did have to reconcile was, if anyone knows me, I love all things French. I'm a frog at heart. And I was like, so what do we do now, Mary? You're completely feeling burned down to the ground at work. Like you haven't felt like you could be honest. And what's that about? But you have this great opportunity as a CEO of an amazing organization. Like, do you embrace that and stand up and say, this is, until the board tells me otherwise, this is, have the confidence to say, this is what I need. These are my expectations of myself, of my board. Or do you cash in your chips, sell the house, move to the south of France, stop shaving, and take smoking? Like,
Well, the second option sounds like fun and appealing. So how did you decide to go face your board and your team and yourself?
Yeah. And, it was like, I flirted with that. And I think deep down, I'm such a practical person, and just, I saw this great opportunity that I thought I may never get again to be, you went to school for 10 years just to be able to have a graduate degree. And you've been given an opportunity without any past experience. I did for 2 years do the operations of the YW,
right?
But, people have trusted you and put faith in you to lead this organization that is responsible for thousands of people in the community, the staff. And, you have this amazing opportunity before you, and you need to step into it, and you need to just say, you figured it out this far. And if you come forward and you say what you need, and the board doesn't agree, and they don't think that you're the right person anymore, then that's life. And that's what's meant to be. And, whatever's next for me will be just as good.
So I'm hearing a shift there, Mary, from kind of stepping into, I'm hearing that shift in confidence and acceptance, moving away from the fear of what if I fail, or I have to prove something to someone, to you know what, I'm here for a reason. I worked really hard to get here, and I'm going to talk about what I need. And if it doesn't work for them, that's okay.
Right. And I had read a book, I also started doing a lot of what can I do for myself to heal, to be better, to, I watched one of the hardest things about watching someone you love die, someone very close to you, someone that's in your house every single day, is, Lenny was self-aware until about 24 hours before he died. So he knew he was dying. He couldn't reconcile with the fact that he was dying, and nor do I blame him for that. But I had asked the doctors privately, I said, how will Lenny die? How will this play out? Because I'm his caregiver. I don't want something suddenly to happen and scare, like panic. So how can I prepare myself for what is to come? And they said there was a big tumor by his heart, and I was worried it would just stop his heart one day. And they said, no, that's not how he will die. He will die slowly. Each day, his organs are going to shut down a little bit more at a time. And that was true. That was what happened. And so Lenny still had all of his mental capacity. It was his body that was physically failing. And during those last few weeks of his life, his regrets continued to pile up. And the things that he wished he would have done or said or mended, that just, it was too late at that point. And what I took from that was not that we have to live these big, grandiose lives and do these amazing things. But at the end of our life, and none of us know when that's going to be, we have to be able to say that we did, regret seems to be one of the hardest emotions to reconcile. And we wish we would have done something differently, or we wish we wouldn't have held that grudge or taken things, so bad. So, the way I approach that, because we only have so much control over other things and people in our lives. And even the way I reflected on that with the YW in my role was, I'm going to do the right thing. I'm going to do the best that I can with the information I have or the skill set that I have. And I'm not doing it for anybody else. I am doing it for me because, yes, we do lots of great things for other people, and I'm responsible for a lot of staff, and I want to do the right thing for them and their lives. But really, what really matters, and I think maybe this could sound a little selfish, if you're doing the right thing because you want at the end of your life to know that you did the best that you could with the resources that you had, whatever that is, I think there's peace in that. And that was something that Lenny didn't have. And so, I was able to take that and say, I always want to do the right thing, the ethical thing, because I have to live with it the rest of my life. And I think, people can justify their behaviors and not be accountable. And that's fine. You just have to be okay to reconcile that at the end of your life, that was the choice that you made.
Right. It's okay. We're going to make mistakes. And I've always taken the position that we're not defined by the mistakes. We are defined by how we show up and what we do in the wake of those mistakes. We can double down on them, and that shows a lot about who we are, or we can hold ourselves accountable and own our stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. And there's so much gray, I think of the work that we do at the YWCA, and there's no, it's not an algorithm. It's not a perfect mathematical equation of how we perform our programs and services, because we're dealing with, human beings, and they're unpredictable and, unique. So a lot of areas that I have had to say, with what I know in this situation, what do I believe is the best path forward? And somebody else in my role may have like disagreed. We have a lot of situations where, we're working with women who are fleeing domestic violence.
Mm-hmm.
And we have an obligation to protect them and protect their confidentiality. And we have a special privilege in statute that allows us to protect them in our organization, meaning we don't have to disclose that they're with us.
Mm-hmm.
They're confirmed.
Why, if anyone tries to inquire about.
Yeah. So, their perpetrators may come looking for them, and we want to keep them safe. At the same time, we can also, unless you have a warrant, even if law enforcement come, we could deny them. And I had a situation a couple years ago where there was a woman who was a victim, and she had her children, and her perpetrator was not the father of her children. And she had been telling people that she was going to skip town. She was going to leave. She was going to leave the YW, and she was going to take her kids and go out of state. And somehow the father of the children, caught wind of this. And a local judge had ordered children and youth to come take those kids. And I had a choice to make. I can either follow the rules as they are set before me, which says, I can't let you in. I can't tell you if this woman is here. I knew if I did that, she would take those children.
Mm-hmm.
And I thought, does she really have the capacity to travel with 3 small children and keep them safe? And so, I had to make a very hard ethical decision, because I'm in violation now of the rules and conduct in which we follow.
Yeah.
For the sake of 3 small children. And I did. And I gave those children up, and it was awful. She screamed and cried. And so it's heart-wrenching. Mm-hmm. And I had to explain to staff who, had I not been there, would have followed the rules, because they don't want to get in trouble. They would have followed, I had to reason that out and make that choice and suffer the consequence. That's my accountability, right? I will suffer the consequences of that because I think I did the right thing.
You're in a catch-22. You're damned if you do and you're damned if you don't, because you have a court order compelling you to do certain actions. So you face contempt of court, and you could go to jail for the court order if you don't comply. And you also have another set of conflicting rules saying this is, under no circumstances do you let anyone in and disclose. So you were stuck and had to make an impossible decision.
Yeah. And, I think I see a lot of that, and I think you have to be grounded and have that confidence to say and justify. I wanted my employees to understand why I made the decision I did. And, that my accountability is a little different than theirs. And so, I want to make sure that people understand the reasons, and you don't have to agree with it, right? But you have to understand the context in which I'm making this decision. And I think it's the right decision, and here's why. So I think that's really, important. And because we have so many of these situations, when I went to graduate school, these are not the leadership lessons that we do case studies on. I mean, you have to learn it on the fly, and you have to have that, that confidence. And I think what it goes back to, again, I want to do the right thing, not for anyone else, but for myself, so that I can sleep soundly at night, so that I know, I want to be a good person.
Tell us more about the work at the YW. Now, you've been there over 10 years, and there's so many different facets of support and services that the YW provides. Tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah. I mean, there are so many fascinating things that we do at the YW. And even as a city resident who's lived in the city of Harrisburg for over 25 years, before I went to the YW, I really had no idea about the scope, breadth of services and the number of people that we impact every day. And no, we are not the women's, we're not a health and fit. So
you're not going to a gym.
Nope, there's no gym, there's no pool, there's nothing like that. And every YWCAs were actually started in London, England in the 1850s, and they spread quickly all around the world. There are 200 countries around the world with YWs. And so we have a very long legacy of being a part of the community. And at one time they were faith-based, but no longer. So our YW here is pretty unique because we are one of the larger YWs even in the country at this point, where we have a residential facility. So we have 113 beds for women and children on site. We're also doing some housing in the community as well, helping with some rental assistance, things like that. And then we have a full-time preschool program, after-school program, summer camp. We do, in addition to our housing, you can live at the YW up to 2 years. It is a goal-oriented program. So, we have expectations. You don't just get to come and live with us for free. We're, taking those steps to make sure that you're self-sufficient. And so we also have opportunities for employment, doing something we call supported employment. So that is helping connect people back into the job market. We do Dress for Success to help people with professional attire. And, we do supervised visitation, but our largest portion of what we do and the vast number of people that we serve, unfortunately, is in victim services. And those include domestic violence, sexual assault, and human trafficking. Mm-hmm. So we're running 24 hours with that service. We can have hotline calls that come in. We could have a hospital who calls us out to the hospital because somebody has been assaulted, and we're the advocate that would come out there and meet with that individual. There are also emergency protection abuse orders that can be filed at night court. So we would help with that process as well, 24 hours a day. So, we're doing all those, and we do free civil legal representation. We have attorneys on staff who provide that service because we know a lot of women, and we serve men too. When a victim doesn't want to leave their situation because maybe they can't afford to file for a divorce or they can't afford to file for custody, if they leave, maybe even their pet who's left behind could be at risk by the perpetrator. So we're trying to fill in all those gaps where, we'll provide an attorney to you that's going to help you file that divorce. And there's no cost to you because we know those are the things that can help break the cycle of violence. So yeah, we're doing all of those things. We're serving almost 10,000 individuals a year.
And like you said, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. This is not some sit behind a computer remote work job. This is very hands-on, in-person work. And it's hard. It's hard and it's emotionally draining work.
That's hard. And you know what? I think one of the things that has surprised me the most about it, it's 24 hours a day. I'm on call 24 hours a day. I have certainly been called into the YW for, the worst case scenarios. We've had 2 fires in my time and 2 deaths at the YW. And we don't really like to talk about those because we don't want anyone to ever view us in a negative light. But yeah, these were health related. We do take individuals in on an emergency basis, and we don't have a whole lot of background information on them to know what their health history is. So, there's those terrible things that happen and that are a part of my role. But the other thing that I just think has so opened my eyes, and I think, gosh, I was so naive, is the prevalence of violence in our community, in any community. I mean, women in general, are, often used as in other parts of the world, weapons of warfare. Mm-hmm. It's to disrupt communities, terrorize them, shame them. There are strategies of, utilizing women and children to somebody else's gain. But And we hear about those stories and we think that, those things happen in other parts of the world. But, the thousands of people that we serve, I don't, right, the administrator of the organization. So I'm not interacting with our clients very often, but I do get all the emails, the end of shifts. And I just had one this week that was, hey, I'm looking for, there's a form, we do tons and tons of forms.
Paperwork.
Yeah, paperwork.
With a lot of accountability because of funding. Yes.
And somebody, said, hey, that gunshot victim that came in, this form is missing from her file. I'm like, a gunshot, this woman was released from the hospital in our care with, a gunshot wound. And that's like going on every single day. So, when I think of the popularity of a YMCA versus the YW, I really believe, and this is very anecdotal, that a YMCA is very positive. It's about health and fitness. It's about live strong. And a YW often is about the things that we don't want to see or talk about in society. And it is the underbelly of our community that we serve. And it's hard. And I think it's really hard for our staff to see that every day and not become apathetic or cynical. Certainly I can have my moments as well. But, I can't imagine if we, given the size and scale and number of people that we're serving, like where our community would be without us. And it's not me. I mean, I think it's everybody who helps support the YWCA, works at the YWCA. I mean, it's organizations like ours, I think, are vital to community safety and quality of life. If we weren't serving these individuals, they would be in our hospital systems, our jails. There's a lot of preventative efforts that go on in addition to just the response, crisis response.
And your work is very dependent on funding, state funding, federal funding, grants, donations. That is a stressful year-to-year budget life.
It is. And, one of the things that kind of drive me a little crazy is, we're a well-run organization and there's a lot of back office stuff that happens to keep our organization moving forward. So we have I have a really strong leadership team in the people who, we reconcile all of our funds every single month. We see where in real time, right? And a lot of nonprofits don't do that. They don't do some of the business aspects of, they're more focused on the service and programs.
Yeah.
And I think you need to equally be focused on the business aspect of the organization and understanding you need to have cash flow because you never know when a budget impasse is going to happen. And right now we have two. We are heavily funded by state and federal funds. We run about 50 different grants in any given year. There's a lot of administrative. We just got notice that, and here's the other, we are like audited all the time. So the federal inspector general, I believe, is coming out to audit like 3 of our federal grants. And there's we have to make sure everything's in order, that we have receipts for every expense that, we've had and timesheets that everybody is being billed, that their salary is being billed to the proper grant, and that we're not misusing funds. And so we take that responsibility very seriously. And that is where I spend a lot of my time. And so, what I'd like to say is, as a nonprofit, we absolutely continue to need community support, fundraising, come to our events and sponsorships. We continue to hold up our end of the bargain in making sure that the government grants that we do have are, we're good stewards of that money. We're using it responsibly and how it's supposed to be. And that we're also not overspending. We're being careful to have some operational funds and cash reserves to be able to ensure that we can still serve the clients that we serve and pay the salaries of the employees that we have undisrupted when things like, budget impasses happen. And I've gotten so many requests to say, like, how is this budget impasse hurting you? Mm-hmm. And it does hurt. I mean, we have to use our cash reserves to be able to continue our services. And I think sometimes that nonprofits that do that, maybe there's also a thought that they don't need your money. They don't need you to make a donation. And that's not true. If you give to a well-run nonprofit, your money is more likely to go where you want it to go and last than if you give it to another organization that maybe is struggling to make ends meet.
And struggling to make payroll.
Right. And that was, we took over Dress for Success, which was its own organization, and it was about to go under. And we were doing similar work. And their board president called me and said, I understand the YWCA does this type of employment work as well. Would you be interested in taking over Dress for Success? And we were, and we did. But when we took it over, they had $2,000 left in the bank.
Wow.
So anyone 6 months prior to that who gave to Dress for Success, if you would have made a charitable contribution to Dress for Success, I have no idea where your money went because it didn't go to the program and service that you thought it was going to go to. And so I would just say, consider that, like, when you're vetting a nonprofit and wanting to support an agency, all of our financials are actually public, as any nonprofit is. All you have to do is pull a 990 and, you can see which organizations are struggling to make ends meet and which ones are not. And I think there's just this acceptance that nonprofits are, living, hand to mouth. And I don't know that should be how they run. And I know some can't help it. I'm not.
Yeah.
We're lucky, but
the more business structure there is to a nonprofit and accountability and tracking and all these things you're describing, the more reliability there is to know that the money you're giving to that nonprofit is going to the programs and services and not to keep it afloat or to pay for salaries, right? Let's shift gears a little bit because I know you love your little doggy who's around there somewhere. And my dog, I don't know if people can hear the breathing in the background. My dog's snoring. But what do you like to do when you're not at work? You have, because of your work and because of, you had that time in your life when you didn't have a lot of friends and it was a lonely period of time. You're far less lonely now.
Yeah.
Well, what do you love to do when you're not working?
Well, yes, I do love my dog, Pippa Jane. Pippa Jane Quinn is a sweet little girl. And yeah, so, I do have, it's funny. I think a big role, my shift from being like a chief operating officer to a CEO was being more outwardly focused, more community focused, more engaging, doing things like this podcast or being present in the community. And I had to learn a different set of skills because I consider myself fairly introverted. And so, one of the things I do love is being home. I am a bit of a homebody. And, I love to cook and entertain. And one of the things that was really, again, obviously the passing of Lenny was so impactful to my life. And, there's not a day that goes by that I don't think of him. But the outpouring of support that I got was, just made all the difference to me in the world. And I developed a lot of really great friendships. I had just, like I said, we had just moved 9 months before Lenny had passed. And I moved, we lived in the city for many years, and we just kind of got lucky and moved into this neighborhood with a lot of really great people. And, I think we reap what we sow. Not only do I want to make the right choices for me and have peace with that at the end of my life, I also believe how we treat other people and conduct ourselves is, we receive what we give. And, Lenny, he worked for Gannett Fleming, and they did wonderful things. He died in December, and, that whole winter, I would wake up in the morning and there would be a stranger that I did not know shoveling my sidewalk. And it was coworkers of Lenny's who just wanted to help me out. And that, I was blown away by that generosity. They had also organized, Lenny loved Christmas, right? That was his thing. And some of his coworkers knew this about him. And they said, Mary, right before he passed, since he passed in December, we have a group of employees that are coming to your house to do Christmas carols. And I told Lenny, I said, listen, I know they want it to be a surprise, but I want to prepare you for this. And he was nervous, like, well, what if I cry? And I'm like, I know, like, it's going to be okay. And I wanted my neighbors to kind of know what was going on, because I just thought, well, if 30 people show up at the front of our house and are Christmas caroling, it might just be weird. So I told my next door neighbors, and they told all the other neighbors. And we had a whole group of people who came out to show just their love and support, just through something simple like Christmas caroling at our house, just for Lenny. And, this neighborhood in which I landed ended up being just an amazing support for me. And, they have.
That's wonderful.
Yeah. I mean, they just, I built these friendships. I certainly built many friendships along when Lenny was alive, and our friendships that we built in the community, and then being where I am and having a lot of wonderful neighbors who turned into friends, and having this support really just is wonderful. Because the things I do in my time, my hobbies of like entertaining, it's great just to have so close by people whenever you need something. If you need to borrow something, we have that. I have that support system here, and still
true community. It sounds like the community from when, I was a little kid, that kind of community that doesn't always exist today.
Yeah. And it's interesting because there's a lot of us that maybe are transplants that aren't necessarily from central Pennsylvania. Mm-hmm. And others that, you choose. We live technically in the city of Harrisburg. Mm-hmm. So you're kind of choosing to know the things that you're going to be putting, we have more foot traffic here, and you're living in maybe closer proximity than you would in the suburbs. I shared a driveway with my neighbors, so there had to be a lot of cooperative agreements, but we also take care of each other. And, if one person needs something, I remember my one neighbor, her and her husband were so busy, and they had teenagers, and there was just no way. She had started a new job, and her daughter was sick. And she's like, I'm just putting this out there. Is there anybody who could possibly, pick up Ava? And sure enough, somebody was like, yeah, absolutely. I'll go get her. I'll bring her home. So there is that.
You need more of that.
Because like me, some of these individuals don't have family around that can help, pick up some pieces as well. So
you mentioned earlier in the podcast, you learned from Lenny's boss. You were inspired by Lenny's boss and how wonderful Lenny's boss was through his illness. What was so good about what Lenny's boss did?
So the CEO of Gannett Fleming at the time, Bob Scare, he came to the house to check on Lenny, to say, like, how are you doing? And to me, I felt like, wow, that meant a lot to have the CEO of a very large company. I mean, at the time, Gannett Fleming probably had 900 employees at its headquarters, and then other locations around the country and even in other parts of the world. So I know he's busy and he's got a lot on his plate. For him to take the time out, just made you feel like Lenny was not just another employee, that he actually mattered. After Lenny passed, Gannett Fleming was very, he called me and said, like, this is how we're processing Lenny's life insurance. And, he had some vacation days left. And so we're doing all these things. And I just want to make sure, do you have any questions? Is there anything that you need? And I also recognize that Gannett Fleming allowed, Lenny was doing radiation. And radiation, has to happen every single day. Mm-hmm. And it was hard he couldn't drive. So for me to get him to and from Hershey Med every single day while I was working just wasn't, it was difficult. And so they organized a carpool to bring Lenny to Hershey Med. And that, I recognize that as that they're a firm, right? They've got billable hours.
Yeah. For listeners, Gannett Fleming, large engineering services firm, professional services firms living in billable hours. And that's how they measure, in general, how professional services firms measure success, billable hours and collections. And they are putting a human need ahead of the billable hour at that time, which is huge.
Yeah. And I mean, Bob allowed that to happen. I know that's not practical. I believe, given Lenny's position within the company, he had a direct line to the CEO. That makes a difference too. And while I loved that was a possibility, I also recognize, like, at an organization like the YW, where we're doing direct service, like, we can't take staff away from working one-on-one with a client or being in a classroom, to help out another staff.
And they can't work remotely. It's not feasible to work remotely in that environment. There are differences, sure.
Yeah. And so I just, they impressed me so much, like, it just little things like that.
I'm hearing empathy. I'm hearing the empathy, the personal touches of even reaching out to have a conversation. Anyone can do.
Right. I can do better. I can certainly treat my staff this way as individuals, and when they're, struggling. But then again, and this is, I'm a huge fan of Brené Brown. And when she talks about empathy, she also talks about having a soft front, but a strong back, right? Because that's what empathy is. And I think for the longest time, which showed up in this not wanting to be vulnerable, keeping everybody at an arm's distance, because I didn't want to be put in a situation where, maybe if I showed too much empathy, somebody would try to take advantage of me. And I think that's my responsibility, to have those boundaries.
Yeah.
And to say, we can be very soft front. We can be very empathetic to anyone, knowing that we also have to have a strong back, and we can't, there's always going to be somebody who's going to try to manipulate that or take advantage of it. And so, you have to have the strong back to say no, but
and hold people accountable. You can still have expectations and standards and hold people accountable and understand the difference between reasons and excuses.
It's hard for people to really say no. That's one of the things I see a lot. And especially when I first started, I would get a lot of people in the community who would say, well, Mary, you have to do this. This is your mission. This is so important for the YW support because, it's in your mission statement. And I had to develop that skill set to say, no, actually it's not. And this is not what we're going to spend our time on. I think that's a really important thing that you're doing, but it's not how the YWCA is going to move its mission forward. So, thank you, but no, that was.
You can't say yes to everything. There could be a million things that seem to align with the mission. You can't say yes to everything. You have to be able to be discerning.
Right. And that, that's again, like that, I think that's a leadership lesson you learn over time. And because otherwise, I also think when you're trying to be everything to everyone, you're also watering down your own mission and your own purpose. And we just can't, we can't do everything. And, you have to have a focus and ability to have those boundaries, but also again, like making sure that, staff do feel like you care about them as people and it's a two-way street. We will show up for you, but you need to show up for us too. And so there's two parts to it. And it definitely, I think post-pandemic, I do see a shift in expectations of staff.
Say more about that.
I think they don't always understand the need to be present. There was such a shift in the world about working from home. Sure. And,
their neighbors are sitting here on a computer like you and I are.
Yeah, exactly. They wanted that. And they wanted flexibility. Basically, I want to kind of, well, why can't it would just be more convenient for me if I could change my shift from this time to this time. And it's like, well, that might be good for you, but that's not what's good for the organization. And, because we run 24 hours a day,
changing that shift impacts, there's a domino effect to these one-off changes. And that's sometimes hard for an individual to understand, to see those dominoes.
Yeah, it absolutely is. And we have, we try to be as fair as possible. One department might actually receive a lot more grant money than another department. And so we have to make up that difference. And that's, what we fundraise for and find other sources of money to make up that difference. So there isn't this big, disparity between one department and another, just because one happens to be receiving higher amounts of grants. Also recognizing, that there are different skill sets and levels. Obviously, our attorneys on staff are going to have a different skill set, expectation, education than some of our employees who work for front desk. So there's going to be a pay differential, right? Like there's differences there, absolutely, that are unique to the role. But we do try to make it as fair as possible, but we just can't have that flexibility. And we do have to be very on point about our paperwork, because we are monitored so often and we don't want to have to pay money back. We don't want to get cited for doing something wrong. And I think some of that is really hard for employees to understand. And I think sometimes they think we're intentionally just making lives difficult by having to fill out all these forms and have them filled out. Some of the expectation is if you do an intake, that paperwork has to be in our system within 24 hours. Those aren't our rules. That's just the government grant in which we run. And so I think
these are the disconnects that come up in a lot of different organizations between employees who have to do things a certain way and what they perceive to be you sitting in an ivory tower having a good old time, right? And that's not what's happening.
Right. And if you don't get the day off that you wanted off, we just had a situation where it was like, well, it's my vacation time. I should be able to take it whenever I want. And it's like, well, as an essential service provider, we have to be able to balance that we have enough staff to respond when you take that day off. And that is even true even in our preschool program, right? Because you need so many adults per children. Yep. And so if, 2 people, 3 people want off the same day, it's not going to happen.
Yeah. This happens in private industry too. For practical standpoint, there are certain staffing needs. And that's why we create rules or system or process around how we request time off. And is it first in time to the request, or is it based on seniority? Or there's a system for how these things happen, because there just has to be a certain staffing requirement.
Yeah.
Not about fairness. It's about need and things beyond the control of the organization, things that just have to be.
Yeah. And it's hard. I mean, just that, the direct service piece. And if we have, the other thing I've seen a lot of, and so quitting without notice.
Oh, yeah.
This is a huge pet peeve of mine. And, I have an assistant, and she's been with me about a year and a half, and she's great. One of the things I so respected about her when I offered her the position and I said, when can you start? Mm-hmm. She said, I actually won't be able to start for a month because I am working on a project. I really respect the boss that I have now. I don't want to leave her high and dry. I need to finish this project that I'm doing. And so I won't be available for a month. I felt I can wait a month. I would love to have you tomorrow, but I would rather wait a month because you just showed me so much integrity.
And how she will treat you if or when that day ever comes.
And I can't teach you integrity.
Mm-hmm.
I can teach you how to do the job. But those behaviors are so much more important than, any of the other technical skill sets that you have. And I feel like when people don't get what they want, the day off that they want, or, maybe they felt like, I had another staff that was very upset because we were able to give out gift cards to our crisis workers because the grant said so. And it was kind of a one-off thing. It was unusual, but they were trying to help provide, if they needed it for like gas money or something like that. And so we gave our crisis workers these gift cards, and they were, like $25 for the month, or maybe $50. I don't remember now. Our crisis workers are on call 24 hours a day. They are the ones that are getting called out to hospitals, to night court, into the shelter to deal with situations. It's not an easy job. And I had another staff person who was like, well, you just don't care about the rest of us, and that's not fair. And they ended up leaving with a 3-day notice. And it's like, you're putting all of your other coworkers to pick that up. And I know that that's just kind of the cost of doing business.
Oh, your favorite phrase.
My favorite phrase. And it happens everywhere in every industry. People aren't giving notice and they're just walking off. But I also know that we're a small community. And I just had somebody who leads another organization not hire someone because they knew that they had heard a rumor of them walking off the job without notice. Mm-hmm. And they didn't want to perpetuate that in their organization. So, I think people do have to recognize that word gets
consequences.
Yeah. Like
consequences. And in small communities, reputation can and will precede you.
Yeah. Don't burn bridges.
Yeah. Yeah. And which takes us back to mistakes. We're going to make mistakes, and we have to own our stuff. It's what we do in the wake of those mistakes. It's okay to not like your job. We don't have to like our jobs. If we're going to burn the place down on the way out, well, that's going to leave a mark.
Yeah. And I think it just makes you look petty. Even when I remember even interviewing for my assistant position, and I asked whoever I was interviewing, why do you want to leave your current job? And there was a whole very long list of complaints. And I just thought, okay,
that's a flashing neon sign of warning.
Yeah, you're going to have the same complaints here, because all of those things are just the nature of a job, right? It's not always, work is hard. It's hard. It's challenging. It's getting up every day and being resilient and trying to find, those positive moments, and a lot of either tedious work or people who are unappreciative for the service you're providing, but still
sadness and brutality and the things that you see in the services the YW provides. But Mary, you're someone who personifies that getting up every day and the resilience, and knowing that there was something at the other end of 10 years of education and going to school part-time and working and all these things. I mean, you personify that resilience and, the death of the person you love most in your life and all of these things just over and over again. And yet here you are, you have a wonderful partner in your life. You love the work you're doing. You continue to persevere and you thrive on continued education and learning opportunities and everything. You're such an inspiration. I'm so grateful to you.
Well, no one's going to live your life for you, right? You have one chance, and you get to make those choices for yourself. And so I think I'm exceptionally ordinary. You're very kind, and I think people have grief and struggle. If you are lucky, you have grief and struggle in your life, and you can do what you want with it, but you only get one life and one opportunity, and it doesn't get easier as you get older. That there's a quote that I love, that it's like, hard choices now, easy life later, or easy choices now, hard life later. And, finding that discipline, and no matter what has happened to you, no matter what hard, awful, sucky thing, it's yours, and no one is going to, there's no knight in shining armor that's just going to come fix it for you. You have to do it yourself, no matter what is true or just or fair, because we're all different. And some of us have been born into very wealthy families, and some of us have been born into very poor families.
And who's to say which one is a blessing or a curse? It could be either or.
And it just, in the end, it doesn't matter. I mean, you still got to do your life. So I don't know. It's very cliche.
How can people support the YW? Where can they go to donate, support?
Yeah. So if you would like to support the YW, our website is YWCAHBG.org. There's donate options. There's also, one of the things that if you're looking for tangible items that we need, we are always looking for twin sheet sets. We go through quite a bit of bedding, twin size bedding and pillows and towels. That is something that turns over a lot that we need. And then, just coming to our events, we have a really big kind of fun event coming up in December, and it supports our legal center. So all the services, the free legal civil representation that we provide. And while we do receive grants, we also have to bridge that gap with fundraising. And our purse auction event takes place on December 4th at the West Shore Country Club. And you can purchase tickets for that on our website as well. And those are it's not a heavy agenda, like there's not a heavy program or anything like that. You can just kind of come and go, have fun, bid on some purses. We have everything from very high-end Gucci's to middle of the road things. And it's very festive and Christmassy, and there's music.
Handy bag and the live auction, lots of fun stuff.
Yeah. So, even just coming out to support us. And, we do a lot of talks in the community. So if, somebody wants us to come out and talk about our services that are available, we talk to a lot of community groups about the human trafficking work that we do, things like that. Like that's all free to the community. We're happy to come out and just, build awareness about the work that we do and supporting those who are in need.
Awesome. Thank you so much for joining us today on Leadership Backstage. Really appreciate you and looking forward to seeing you out and about at YW events to come.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Yeah. Have a great day. And until the next time we go behind the curtain on Leadership Backstage, thanks for joining us today.
The Leadership Backstage podcast requires more than a conversation. It takes action, research, and collective wisdom. If today's episode resonated with you, we'd love to hear your insights. Join the conversation and help us shape the future together. We'll be back with more stories, strategies, and real-world solutions that are making a difference for everyone. In the meantime, be sure to subscribe, rate, write a review, and share it with someone you think would benefit from it too. Thanks for listening, and see you on the next episode.